Hi, and welcome to today's show. This show is going to be about something that I've found really irksome on the internet. Just recently, there's been a lot of concentration, a lot of focus on something called a monad. Now, because of this, we've ended up with the Monad Circus. It's the new 3-card trick of enlightenment, you may say. The monad recently has become the latest stage prop for the online enlightened spiritual gurus. I'm not saying this because the idea is trivial. I'm saying it because it's been dragged through the same tired machinery of modern influence. A presenter takes an old metaphysical principle, wraps it up and sprinkles a few quotes from quantum physicists. Then they quietly slide their product under the table. The result is not philosophy, it's disorientation for profit. And they usually do this by claiming that you don't know or you can't know and they have the answer. However, I'll let you come to your own conclusion and I will analyse what is said, how it is said, and you can come to your own conclusion. The first part of any sales pitch, especially to do with spirituality, is what I call the exclusivity shell game. The trick is always the same. The presenter leans forward and usually with a lot of emotion, or they may whisper words like forbidden, hidden, buried, or what the church and religious institutions never wanted you to know. The point is not to inform you, it's to recruit you emotionally. If you like, it's identity enclosure. You are invited to feel chosen before you have examined the claim or the pre-suggested product. This is something to always bear in mind, that when you're being sold any form of religious package, the first thing they want you to do is understand that you've got everything wrong and they've got everything right. Now, if you've studied philosophy or you've been on the earth long enough, you understand there is not a panacea. So when people present a panacea, that really is a big red flag. The logic behind something like the monad is absolutely rotten. The monad is a universal, foundational and mathematical form. It cannot be hidden in the theatrical way that the influencers suggest. A circle is not the private property of a bishop. Geometry was never locked behind a vast monastery wall. The moment tells you, with all this window dressing, that the absolute, which is what the monad represents, has been placed behind a velvet rope. and you should assume that it's not accessible. When people start talking like this, you're not being managed or awakened, you're being directed. The history used to describe the monad is usually dishonest. Suppression did happen in the Dark Ages, but not every act of suppression proves the suppressed doctrine was true, pure, or metaphysically superior. This is something to really take into consideration. Not everything that was suppressed actually worked. A lot of suppression was done to actually protect people. There was suppression, don't get me wrong, but a lot of it was to literally protect the person who went to the institution. You know, for example, it still happens today. You get possessions where the person is chained and tied with ropes and they die of asphyxiation. So, you know, this was stopped in the Middle Ages, this kind of exorcism. However, there are still countries where it goes on, and inevitably the person is either injured or killed. But there's another serious point. If we look back at the time when people were allegedly being killed for religious suppression, it wasn't really like that. The historical accounts show murder being carried out by a religious institution, not for religious truths. They were about crushing rivals. So if there was another religious sect, quite simply, they killed them. All in the name of Jesus, of course, but that's what they did. The other thing was that once the people realized that they could get rid of the competition, they started using that system as revenge or to claim back an inheritance. If somebody was called a witch, then generally speaking, they usually ended up tortured and dead. Another thing it was used for was political survival. If you were in a political party but you wanted to get rid of somebody, it paid to make sure that they were a witch. So realistically, when they turn every historical conflict into proof that one's favourite system was a mystical truth, firstly, it's lazy. And really, it's dressing up the mundane to mean something else. Remember, your average online influencer does not do history. They practice the same theatre that got people killed. And these costumes and behaviours are borrowed from a very dark history. However, the trick still works because most people attach emotionally, they don't attach cognitively. I want to sort of go back to what the old world was essentially about. It was not the battlefield that we are told and what they pretend. Really, it wasn't a clean war between church and dogma and enlightened heretics. It was a muddle, an absolute muddle. Compromise, local cults, folk healing, political pressure, religious overdrive. The cunning folk, the clerics, the pagans, the folk rites, and practical magic often existed in the same social ecosystem. It wasn't that rare for a member of the church to make a sacrifice to an old god as well as to pray to Jesus. So much of what is marketed today as suppressed wisdom, it really wasn't a pristine truth. The Dark Ages was a crazy marketplace. I'm sure it was useful for those who were looking for answers, because literally there was a plethora of choices. But we shouldn't forget that this period that a lot of influencers talk about, it was a marketplace, very much like today. There is something else I would like to add to check whether or not we're dealing with sovereignty or something else. The sovereignty test is simple. If the absolute comes with a members only tier, then it's not absolute. And in reality, that's what the monad is. It's a mathematical, arithmic expression of what ancient occult philosophers or mystics understood what the monad to be. I call this next trick, which is used to sell an ideology, the frequency trap. It's a really nasty trap. It's awful. It's where the presenter reaches for the ancient planetary prison, the archons, the demiurge, the false world, the cosmic parasite, and the soul trap. I hope you're noticing what is happening here. The presenter tells you fear feeds the parasite, while spending 40 minutes making you afraid. They also tell you that ignorance creates bondage, while flooding you with emotionally half-loaded coherence. They tell you to transcend manipulation while manipulating your nervous system in real time. When you're watching this trick, remember, this is not awakening, it's control. Let's look at any presentation philosophically. If somebody is presenting information about the monad, a proper metaphysical idea should sharpen the mind and at the same time increase lucidity. However, most presenters give you the information which produces a theatrical panic. Remember, if teaching leaves you paranoid, more resentful, more unstable, and more independent on the person who's giving you the information, it certainly isn't liberation. Really, it's paranoia. It's simply slavery to an ideology that is being fed to you, wearing a very glamorous costume. So the other real irony is the Archon sales pitch. The so-called Gnostic presenters claim to expose psychic perdition, while at the same time actively performing it. They claim to unravel and pull the trap to pieces, while training you, the audience, to live inside one. after listening to the type of presentation that I've just described, there is a simple sovereignty test you can do. Ask yourself, has this teaching left me in possession of myself? Or has it given me a frantic feeling of self-loss? Something to bear in mind. If you're really getting spiritually uplifting information, you shouldn't be feeling any form of self-loss. I'm going to move on to what I consider the worst trap 3 if you like, which is the commodity trap. It's the ugliest of all the tricks. Once the presenter has gained confusion, agitated you, and then hinted at a sense of exclusion, he then offers you, or she offers you, the cure, a roadmap. Usually it's a tiered initiation, or he might, or they might, throw in a private lecture, or a premium decoding, or a 30-day recovery from the illusion that they have just spent an hour manufacturing. Realistically, when you understand this is where the whole thing about monad, archons, prison planet, it just really collapses under its own stupidity. Let us now actually talk about the monad. If the word is to mean anything at all, it refers to the first principle, the substratum, the ground, the source, the unity, and the prior condition of being itself. It's not a stage that you reach in the way that you reach a weekend retreat or a coaching milestone. You cannot travel towards the floor that you're already standing on. And realistically, can you sell a key to a door that's never been locked? You can't turn the infinite into a staircase without reducing the method to some kind of merchandising. And this is essentially the vulgarity of this genre. It converts ontology into a funnel. It takes the oldest philosophical question and repackages it as customer progression. Please try to remember that the modern monad salesman does not reveal the ground of being. He monetizes it by practicing disorientation and distortion. Let us look at the final, if you like, packaging of anybody who is selling you an ideology, be it the monad or whatever is popular at the moment. And this is what I call the slickest move, because once the historical mystique and emotional pressure have done the work, the presenter reaches for quantum physics. It's at this stage when Planck, Schrödinger, Heisenberg, vibration, frequency, waveforms, consciousness, mathematics, and the usual blizzard of quotes and jargon arrive. This point is not careful argument. It's a very old technique called borrowed prestige, and it's something the new priesthood are absolutely expert at. in reality, it's high-level sleight of hand. The presenter wants spirit and religiosity validated by the laboratory. He wants the audience to feel that ancient metaphysics has finally been endorsed by men in white coats. But if gnosis requires a physicist's signature, then it's no longer gnosis. It's just another external authority structure. In reality, the religious institution is replaced by the lab, and the bishop or religious representative is replaced by the expert. However, the sad fact is the soul is still waiting for permission to ascend, to become better. So this is why this maneuver is so revealing. It shows that the presenter does not trust the strength of their own metaphysical argument. So he launders it through science quotes, often selectively and often badly. Instead of making a philosophical argument, they perform authoritarian ritual to sell the product. And I think that's one of the saddest things, that realistically, you can't sell a religious philosophy. It's amoral, if you wish. And realistically, people discover religious nuances or religious philosophies themselves, that there really is no point in learning a complex philosophy if you don't even understand the basic philosophy. So, I'm imploring you, don't bite into this, okay? Use your brain and analyze. I would like to add, when one is listening to any kind of presentation, if you need a PhD to understand it, generally speaking, it's never the truth. It's only someone looking for social endorsement. But I'm not being truly cynical. In all honesty, I quite like a lot of these presenters, but I'm just trying to point out what the show is, what the pattern is. The pattern is to give you information, but it's usually very biased, because this information is to frighten you into wanting to connect to the course. Realistically, that's not how one should look for information. Now, I teach privately, but I do not advertise, and I always work with the level of the person. Fear is not part of it. It's a question of working towards that person, and even myself in many cases, coming to a new level of understanding. So I do admire the lighting, the edit, the cadence, and the passion, and sometimes occasional insight. But we have to remember the monad, or the absolute, is not a product launch. It's not a lifestyle brand. It is the indivisible one. And believe me, it's not improved by a funnel, a membership tier, or a dramatic thumbnail. When a presenter turns the search for the first principles into an identity cult or an emotional dependency system, or even a community ladder, he's not seeking to free the person who is looking. It's just another redecoration of the mirror. The old priest, the sad salvation is through us. The new influencer awakening is always through them. The costumes change, but the mechanisms have not. The truth is, the Monad is not a secret club. It's not a premium archive. And it's certainly not a receipt from 1945. It's not even a quantum slogan. And it's certainly not a roadmap to the spiritual heights. The truth about the Monad is much less flattering. It asks for sobriety. Its design is for discrimination. Its real message is to ask you to stop confusing intensity with insights. And it stops you to look at things like performance instead of aiming for internal revelation. The final arithmetic concerning the Monad is very simple. If the teaching makes you smaller, needier, more frightened, and more dependent, it's false. If it makes you clearer, steadier, and harder to manipulate, and less impressed by spectacles, then you are heading the right way. So going back to the presenters, we admire the tricks, and we admire the sleight of hand, and the rhythm, but realistically there is very little philosophy there. And if one is seeking, you need something to challenge you, something to make you reassess your belief system, not watching a flourish that is designed to steal confidence or designed to undermine you. Just remember that the truth is rarely hidden, and it's certainly something that you cannot buy. Thank you very much for listening to me, and namaste. Let us look at the final, if you like, packaging of anybody who is selling you an ideology, be it the Monad or whatever is popular at the moment. And this is what I call the slickest move, because once the historical mystique and emotional pressure have done the work, the presenter reaches for quantum physics. It's at this stage when Planck, Schrödinger, Heisenberg, vibration, frequency, waveforms, consciousness, mathematics, and the usual blizzard of quotes and jargon arrive. This point is not careful argument. It's a very old technique called borrowed prestige. And it's something the new priesthood are absolutely expert at. In reality, it's high-level sleight of hand. The presenter wants spirit and religiosity validated by the laboratory. He wants the audience to feel that ancient metaphysics has finally been endorsed by men in white coats. But if gnosis requires a physicist's signature, then it's no longer gnosis. It's just another external authority structure. In reality, the religious institution is replaced by the lab, and the bishop or religious representative is replaced by the expert. However, the sad fact is the soul is still waiting for permission to ascend, to become better. So this is why this maneuver is so revealing. It shows that the presenter does not trust the strength of their own metaphysical argument. So he launders it through science quotes, often selectively and often badly. Instead of making a philosophical argument, they perform authoritarian ritual to sell the product. And I think that's one of the saddest things, that realistically, you can't sell a religious philosophy. It's amoral, if you wish. And realistically, people discover religious nuances or religious philosophies themselves. That there really is no point in learning a complex philosophy if you don't even understand the basic philosophy. So, I'm imploring you, don't bite into this, okay? Use your brain and analyze.